Well, good evening, everyone. Super good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Grace and peace, man. It's another Sunday. It's just, man, what a privilege to just be with you all week after week. I love the consistency of the rhythm of worshiping God once a week, and just, man, it's so good. Just good to be with you all. So I want to welcome all of you, but including those joining us online. We love you lots, and anyone here who's new and kind of plugging in, I'm so glad that you're here and joining us. So it's wonderful to have you. So we are in, it's part 2 in our series titled Deconstruction, Finding God Again. And I should name that am I hearing a little bit of kind of fuzz? Are y'all hearing that? Am I okay? It's not bad? All right, I'll keep going. So I want to mention that while deconstruction kind of has like a more academic meaning for anyone who is a philosopher nerd and you are into postmodern philosophy, then you know it kind of has like a specific meaning. It kind of comes from Jacques Derrida, and there's like a whole wing of thought that's like doing things with deconstruction. And while there is a kind of connection between what we're talking about in this series and that, it's not quite the same thing. And so I want to name, just on the off chance there's like 2 people who are really bugged that I seem to not be talking a lot about Jacques Derrida and postmodern philosophy. I'm using it in more the sense that it has come to mean in the broader church. And really deconstruction, it kind of started there in that world and kind of jumped out of the academy and then kind of has become, what am I trying to say? It has gone mainstream in the church. And really here, what it tends to mean is kind of a season of wrestling, a season of question asking, a season of kind of really questioning inherited beliefs and theologies. And the way even we talked about it last week was the idea of kind of almost having to process our church of origin. In the same way you have a family of origin, many of us have a church of origin, or some place that you start to pick up ideas and theologies about God and the world and yourself and Christ, and some of what deconstruction is kind of a working through that and realizing, not all of that was actually helpful. Even some certain ideas might have been really destructive. So that's kind of what this series is about, is really processing that, not a deep dive into Derridian philosophy or something. So I want to start here with our passage, which is Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. If you've got your Bible, you can read along or, of course, follow on the screen. So Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So I'm kind of one of the last generation that got to do something very significant. This is sort of a fading thing in the culture. When I was young, about say around age 7, 8, 9, 10, I got to play outside without my parents watching me. I know, you're thinking what? How are you alive right now? I mean, just the grace of God, I guess. I don't know. It's fascinating, the culture, how things kind of shift and change over time. And looking back, there was a lot of good from that. Honestly, I had a lot of fun. There were a few things that we did that, looking back, I'm kind of, that was questionable. Some parental supervision might have been wise. And one of those those things is I still have these memories of, I was young, man, maybe even 6, I don't know. But I was just riding around my neighborhood, on my bicycle, and we were playing cops and robbers. This was kind of the game, kids play. Maybe you played it. And it was just a bicycle game. You're going around trying to tag people or whatever. And so what I have this distinct memory of is us playing this game, but we figured out that a really good way to get people or stop them in their tracks was to either throw or jam sticks into the spokes of a bicycle tire. Did anyone do this, or was this just me? Rollins did. Yes. Kirby did. Yeah, it was. I mean, looking back, it's questionable. I have memories of me. I mean, I both sinned against others and I was sinned against in this way. Like, I have memories of riding my bicycle around with a stick in my hand, trying to, and a lot of times, 9 out of 10 times you'd miss. Not always, though. But I also have the memory of me riding my bicycle, and all of a sudden someone jumps out from behind, the fence, and it's like, ah, and they jab it in, and y'all, I mean, it's remarkable how quickly a tire will just, I mean, you get that, a stick strong enough, and I have this memory of me just kind of floating like a bird, just, no. Now, I don't associate this with tremendous pain, which I think must mean I must have landed in the grass. I don't know. But, oh, childhood. Now, I bring this up because what's interesting about this passage is it occurs to me that Matthew jams a stick right into the spokes of his remarkable, amazing story. The passage we just read, it's the end of the book of Matthew. These are literally, we just read the final words. That's it, verse 20. That's it, that's how it ends. So, he's just written this, magnum opus of, the story of Christ, and, it's 28 chapters, and, it's the stirring conclusion, right? It's the high point. Here they are. Jesus told them where to be. I'm going to be on this mountain. In Galilee, they get there, they see him, they worship him, and here's what's so interesting, though, here's what I think it should say. This is how I think Matthew should have done it, if it were me. It would have gone something like this. When they saw him, they worshiped him, and then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, and so on and so forth. Right? He can go into his big speech. And yet, what happens is not that. Did you catch the line? All right, so there's this line where here he is, right? The disciples are there. They see him. It says they gather around him. They worship him. But what was the line? But some... What? Did you catch it? Doubted. I'm fascinated by this. Why would he put that in there? I mean, this is, if you're trying to persuade people to believe, and, this is your whole story, and here we are, the closing sentences, and they're there, and they worshiped, but some people had some, questions in the back of their mind. I'm just fascinated by this passage. I love it. So tonight I want to give you three myths about doubt. Last week we just touched on doubt. It was sort of implicit in the message, but I really wanted to make it explicit. I really wanted to unpack this idea of doubt, because it's been kind of stigmatized in the church a lot. I think you think of Christianity as the people of faith, right? And so we tend to think, well, what's the opposite of faith? Well, doubt. So if faith is good, well, doubt is right? And there's been a lot of stigma around, a lot of even shame, don't bring that up, don't say that. Your doubts are not welcome here. And so I want to help us kind of move beyond some of that, because I think actually Matthew would probably disagree. So here's 3 myths about doubt that I think this passage dispels. Myth number 1, if you're a note taker, you can jot this down. Myth number 1, only bad Christians doubt. In the scare quotes is bad for those listening on the on the podcast later. Only bad Christians doubt. For some reason, every time I had read this text previously, it could be because another gospel tells a story slightly differently. I'm not sure, but I always just assumed that there was a broader or multiple groups of people here. I thought it was the disciples and some other folks. And so when it said, they worshiped him, my brain just filled in, well, that's the disciples, the 11, right? The 11 disciples, because Judas is no longer with them, so not 12, now it's 11. All right, so I assumed it was the 11, And then you have some, the other, maybe the second class Christians or something, the riffraff are kind of there and they're like, we're not sure. But actually, no. Let's read it again, verse 16. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go, and when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Isn't that remarkable? These are some of Jesus' closest friends. These were folks who, at least from a distance, had witnessed some of the crucifixion. They had been there soon after Jesus had appeared to them in his resurrection. They're like, they got the front row, seats to this whole thing, and yet they doubted. Now, I have another kind of question or a thing that's in the back of my mind. I'm sort of speculating here, but I do wonder, how did Matthew know that? It's possible they shared afterwards, but my hunch is, would someone come up to Matthew like, hey, I heard you're writing that book. What is it you call it? He's like, a gospel. Oh, that's right. You're writing that gospel thing. Maybe you should know that when everyone was there, remember that moment where Jesus was about to ascend to heaven and everyone was worshiping him? Just so you know, I was totally not sure. My guess is no one came up to him and just was like, on the DL, all right, don't say my name, but you should put that in there. Now I'm guessing that didn't happen. Now here's what's interesting. Matthew was one of the 11 who was there. Which gets me to thinking, was it him? In other words, is that how he knew that they were there and they saw him and they worshiped him, and yes, there was faith in that moment, it was real, and yet at the same time, but some doubted. Again, I'm kind of reading that's not explicitly there, but it could be. Maybe that's how he knew, because he was there. And in the back of his mind, he was like, oh my gosh, is this real? All right, so that's the first myth. Only bad Christians doubt. Because I don't think the disciples, I don't think Matthew, regardless of whether it was Matthew or some others, they weren't bad Christians. These were people who went on to transform the world in powerful ways. Nearly all of them died a martyr's death. So these weren't bad, these were folks, these were true believers, and yet they had their doubts too. Fascinating. All right, second myth is this idea that perfect evidence drives away all doubts. I think this is probably one of the hardest lessons for us to learn, especially if you are of a particularly intellectual bent, where you're you want to figure it out, and get all the I's dotted and T's crossed and figure out your reasons and your arguments and, get it all clear. Those of us who want to really sort of arrive at the mythical land of certainty. Anyone ever want to arrive at certainty? I do. And it's such a powerful temptation for us. But here's the thing. If there was ever a group of Christians who were gathered, and a writer should have been able to say about them, there they were, and they saw him, and they worshiped him, and not even one, had a doubt, for their eyes had seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. If there's ever a group of people that a writer should have been able to say those words, it should have been these people. They're right there. I said, they're front row seats to the whole thing. And not even just the crucifixion, resurrection, all that, but 3 years before, they'd seen every miracle, every jaw on the floor kind of moment, oh my gosh, he seems like much more than a man. Clearly he's a man, but there's something else going on here. They'd seen it all. And yet, even they had this moment of oh my gosh. Now, we might kind of question, this sounds crazy though. They were bad Christians. Because, if that were me, I wouldn't have doubts. I think here's the thing. The truth is, no matter what we experience, no matter what we see, I mean, because some of us think like, if Jesus were to just show up in my room and be like, hello, I am Jesus, we're like, now I believe, But here's the thing, I mean, let's say that happens, and then you can't sleep for hours, but eventually you do drift off to sleep. You wake up the next morning, and he's gone. And you're like, what was that? Did I dream that? I'm not really sure. Was I hallucinating? Maybe I might be having a psychotic break. I mean, right? Can you just go down the road of like, seeing it with our eyes, hearing it with our ears, like something that comes in through our senses? I mean, the truth is we are just human beings. We don't have, we're not omnipotent, all-knowing, all-seeing. We're not God. And so we don't have that God's eye view, which means there is always room for doubt. No, and this is true regardless of even faith. I mean, this isn't just a problem of like, well, this is the problem with Christianity, it requires faith, but I'm different. I want to believe things that don't require faith. It's like, sorry, friend, everything requires some faith because you got to make some assumptions about the world. You got to trust a community of people. I mean, even, I might get into this later in this series, do a sermon on science and faith. And it's interesting that even science, there's still an element of faith because, I mean, you can't literally be the one to run every experiment. You have to trust people. Like, did you do that right? There's still a community, and even then, you can make assumptions. You can miss something. You can misinterpret. I mean, right. In other words, as human beings, we never arrive at the mythical land. Which, by the way, doesn't mean I don't think that we just have to walk around like, well, I just don't know anything ever. Like this sort of perpetual doubt. I don't think we have to get kind of in that cynic mode, but it does mean there is always an element of, look, I have my thoughts, I have my reasons, I have my own experiences, and I'm kind of bringing all that to the table, but no, I'm not certain in that way. I remember in my own kind of background and story, there was a point where I had so many questions about God and Christian faith and all that. I shared a little bit of this last week. And I had plenty of doubts. And honestly, I got really sick of having doubts about Christian faith. So I finally reached a point where I was like, you know what? I think I'm just done. Like, I still kind of believe in God. Like, I think it makes sense that God is there or something. But in terms of Christianity and all its particularity, all the particulars, all the doctrines, I can't do this. I can't, because I just don't know. And so, I just got sick of it. So I was like, I think I'm done. I'm just not a Christian anymore. And this was great for like a week because I was like, it felt so good to finally be kind of certain again. Like, yes, pesky doubts, I don't believe such things, And then a week goes by, and then 2, and then 3, and then slowly the doubts started to creep back in, only now it was in the reverse direction. I started to doubt my doubt. I started to be like, oh gosh, but wait, what if it's true? What if Christ really did rise from the dead? What if, oh my gosh, what if I really will be called to account on Judgment Day? Or I don't know, all these kind of, ideas and things. And all of a sudden I found myself, now what is this an example of? I realized in this moment, so this is what it is to be a human being. No matter what path you go down, and still I have a deep interest in Buddhism. But there was a point where I thought, well, maybe that's more my path, But even there, I realized there was still this faith, like this guy named the Buddha who was like, had this enlightenment experience, and so I'm going to meditate for like 20,000 hours and maybe experience it. Well, how do I know? What if it's all for naught? What if it's all just, I mean, can you see how no matter what road you go down, you never arrive. So this idea of perfect evidence drives away all doubt. Not happening. C.S. Lewis said this: faith is the art of holding on to things that your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. I like that. Because it's very easy to be kind of swept up with, for one, or just our own kind of swings and seasons, and bad things happened in this season of my life, so now it's okay, I'm with God, but then later good things happen, I'm like, okay, I'm back, or people around me or believing things, so I'm like, okay, yes, and then I get in a new community and they don't believe the same thing, so I'm like, okay, no, never mind, no, this is what we believe, and we don't, we're out, no, we're out on this, and then later, like, okay, no, we're in, we're back. Right, you can see how life can just kind of push you around. And this isn't, well, I like that he names things that your reason has once accepted, because what I'm not trying to give here is this idea of just like, well, just feel it out, man, and just believe whatever you want, because, I mean, who knows anything? I think you still need to use your mind, right? Even the Bible talks about this, love God with all your mind. So there is, I think the mind matters, reasons matter, evidence and, things making sense to you, that matters. But at the same time, there is that faith is kind of what keeps you grounded in the midst of those waves of life and culture and people and family and, all the drama. And boy, you can just get bullied, All right, so that's number 2. Number 3, myth number 3, is the idea that doubt and worship cannot coexist. Another assumption I made when I'd read this text previously was once I realized it was the disciples, then I made another kind of leap, which was, okay, so there's 2 groups among the disciples. There were the true, faithful disciples, the worshiping disciples, and then there were some other people. But again, read the text, verse 17. When they, and we know previously that's the 11, when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. In other words, I don't think it was that there was one group who's kind of like the true, and they're there with their hands raised, just praising the Lord, and then, a few other disciples are kind of off to the side, like arms folded, like eye rolling. That's not the image you get. Instead, what you get is they were there, they saw him, they worshiped him, and then some, even in the midst of their doubt, were worshiping too. I think this matters because in church kind of settings, often there's a pressure, to just believe, just believe, just have faith, don't push away those doubts, run from them, they're of the devil or something, that's just the demons tricking you or whatever. And it's there's almost this mentality of, you got to do that so that you can worship, You got to get rid of those pesky doubts so that you can pray. You've got to push back so that you can be holy or something. And I think that's just not the picture you get in the Bible, and it's certainly not the picture you get in this passage. Instead, it almost seems like we're invited. We might say it like this: in the midst of my doubt, I'm invited to worship. In the midst of them, I'm invited to worship. My often quoted Fyodor Dostoevsky, every 4th sermon at least, I quote Dostoevsky. And he was someone who, a novelist, a Russian novelist who really wrestled with faith and doubt and questions and kind of, it's quite profound, his novels. And so towards the end of his life, and if you've read his books, this is really true. Because he doesn't poke fun at atheism. He takes it very seriously. And really, he doesn't straw man it, he steel mans it. I mean, some of his arguments, he makes probably some of the most powerful arguments in favor of atheism in his novels that I've ever read, even though he wasn't one. He took it dead serious. But towards the end of his life, 1881, he wrote this. He said, "It is not as a child that I believe in Christ and confess him. My Hosanna has passed through a great crucible." That means like a trial, a pressing, a pressure of doubt. And I love the way that he names that his Hosanna, that means like his worship, was not derailed by his doubts, was not silenced by his doubts, but it was actually, it purified in made it more beautiful, it more mature. And so tonight we are going to be engaging in communion, and the invitation to you, of course, there's no pressure to engage if you're like, oh, I don't want to, no problem, no pressure. But if you're sitting there and you wonder like, I don't know if I can engage something like this. Like, I don't know if I can really, trust God or worship God, or I don't know if I can engage. I think the beautiful part about the Christian faith and the invitation from Christ is for us to bring our doubts with us to the table of the Lord. And isn't it lovely that in this passage, does Jesus berate the disciples? Does he, give them trouble because some of you, not all of you, are really believing? No, he commissions them all. He sends them all. And that's the beautiful thing about our faith in this moment, is that Christ just welcomes us, just right where we're at. So I know that not everyone is familiar with the practice of communion. So this goes back many thousands of years, right, to the very beginning of Christian faith. It was the moment when the night Jesus was betrayed. He had one final meal with his disciples, and during that meal, he stood up and he held up a loaf of bread, and then he broke it. And he said, "This is my body," referring, of course, to the crucifixion to come the next day. And then he held up a cup of wine, and he said, This is my blood. Whenever you eat this bread, whenever you drink this cup, remember me. Remember me. And so for 2,000 years, Christians have come to the table of the Lord to remember again who God is, who Christ is, in the life of love and joy and forgiveness and goodness and faith that he calls us to. So that's what this time is about. And I want to mention, for those who are joining us online, if you have like some bread or any like grape juice or wine or something, there in your house, feel free. We'd love for you to join us. And if you don't feel fancy, that's okay, because tonight we had a little snafu, a little mix-up with I won't go into it. We just had an issue where we don't have our normal communion cups, so we got fancy Dixie cups for communion tonight. So in just a moment, Eric and Michael are going to come forward. They're going to serve you communion, but we're just going to form kind of one line right here down the middle, and they'll hand you a piece of bread, and then you can just go by and grab a cup, and then at that time you can just take it immediately, or you can return to your seat and partake, and yeah, that's kind of how this will go. We also do have gluten-free bread for anyone who needs that. It'll stay there on the table on the end. So, all right. Last, we practice what's called an open table here, meaning, as I said earlier, if you want to participate in communion, you are welcome. So, I don't know if I have all the right beliefs. Well, you're welcome to partake. If you have enough faith to say, God, if you're there, I want to connect with you. Christ, if you're present, I want to know you. You just start there. You just join. This is the Lord's table. It's not ours. We don't feel the need to police his table. So let me go ahead and welcome you to the table with this. This is a Christian, Celtic invitation, and it goes like this. This is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. And it's made ready for those who love him and for those who want to love him more. So come. You who have much faith, and you who have little. You who have been here often, and you who have not been here long. You who have tried to follow, and you who have failed. Come, because it's the Lord who invites you. And it's his will that those who want to meet him should meet him here. Come to the table.